Some of the things coming up during the course of our program today, well, most of the excitement, the fireworks, I guess, will be in the latter hour, coming up after 9 o'clock. In fact, just after 9 o'clock news. Arthur Thompson is the chief executive officer of the John Birch Society, which, depending on your political persuasion, is a good thing or a bad thing. For my particular political background, it's a good thing. These are people who have been what you'd call very good patriots for decades now. I can remember way back years ago on a radio show, I used to play an old video. You could hear the audio, of course, over the radio of Robert Welch, who was the founder of the organization, giving a speech in 1957 where he predicted everything that happened historically in this country for decades out. Well, Mr. Thompson is speaking with us today about something that is very current, and that is a free trade agreement with the Pacific Rim, the Pacific nations on the other side of that ocean, and how it could impact you and your job, your ability to make a living. Also, after he moves on, because he's got an event he has to do tonight. He was in Boise last night. I believe he's going to be in Burley tonight. He'll be telling us a little bit about that as well. After he moves on, because he has to go prepare for that, we'll be joined by Governor Butch Otter, and he's talking about teacher raises today. That is that career ladder program that has been in the works for a couple of years that finally might be ready for a vote and perhaps for his approval somewhere down the road. And he's going to talk to us about a new plant that opened in Twin Falls last week. The growth here has just been phenomenal. Perhaps if you look around the state of Idaho, Boise may be the only other place that is growing quite so quickly. So those things are coming up in the latter hour of the program today, which means if you'd like to hear them, you have to stick around and you have to listen to all of the other stuff beforehand. One thing I did want to tell you about today, he has been a guest on this program. Hope to have him back sometime soon. U.S. Senator Mike Crapo making some news. The Daily Signal reporting this. Now, if you did not know, both Senators Crapo and Risch were among those senators who really did a wonderful, wonderful job going after the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives when the ATF was considering certain bans on ammunition that would make certain firearms you own absolutely worthless. You know, if you don't have, well, you could swing them like a club, I guess, but, awfully expensive clubs when you could just cut a switch from a tree. So they managed to force the ATF to back down, but there are some other issues that are still pending when it comes to the Second Amendment and the Obama administration's efforts to wipe it out, which essentially is what this is really all about. They can find an end around to subvert your Second Amendment rights, that is, your rights to bear firearms. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, 37 at our studios. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And this is an exclusive to the Daily Signal, which I get in my morning email box, signed up for it some time ago. And it says, Senator aims to use budget process to end Operation Choke Point. You know why it caught my attention? I may have looked just by this because when I'm doing show prep in the morning, a few hours before we hit air, I'm looking through a lot of these things, just scanning them very, very quickly. But there was a large photograph of Mike Crapo below the headline, and I thought, that might actually have something to do with Idaho. The Daily Signal has exclusively learned that Senator Mike Crapo will offer an amendment Thursday to the Senate's budget proposal that would defund the Justice Department's controversial program known as Operation Choke Point. Here's a quote from Senator Crapo. In Idaho, we have heard from several business owners involved in the guns and ammunition business who experienced difficulty finding essential banking services as a result of this fear and uncertainty on the part of the banks. That's a quote from the senator. The writer says the program was originally designed 2 years ago as a way to stamp out consumer fraud, but has since come under fire for denying legal business owners access to the financial sector. You know what they do? Government will create a lot of these laws, and then they turn around and say, well, this is only going to impact what we're targeting it for. And yet, take a moment, look at some of the law enforcers around the country who are using, a guy goes home, he shouldn't do it, but he goes home, he drinks a six-pack, he gets angry with his girlfriend, he calls her up and makes some sort of threat to her. And the next thing you know, he's not only charged with making the threat and harassment, but with terroristic threatening. Which has got nothing to do with, the law was designed for a guy who calls up and says, I've planted explosives outside the airport, and the whole airport is going to be going up any minute. The law was designed to get him. But you see how this works in this country. So this law designed a couple of years ago, what they've been doing, and I was reading about this on another publication, the Daily Caller, which managed to come across some audio tape made by an actual gun dealer. This guy owned a gun shop in a small town in a state in the Midwest, and he was trying to get in touch with his bank about some issues. And when you're running a small business, your banker is often your best friend. And the banker simply told him, I can't do anything for you. I've got to put all of your funds on hold by orders of the White House. So all of a sudden, this guy couldn't even open his doors and sell ammunition or firearms. What do you do in that situation? This is how you make your living. This is your livelihood. And he's doing nothing illegal. This has been going on all over the country. In that particular case, after the audio tape got released, the White House sent the Justice Department, Eric Holder sent the Justice Department out to the banker and threatened the banker, saying, don't talk to these customers about this issue any longer. In other words, deny them any requests they have for short-term cash or, give them difficulties when it comes time for their daily deposits. Whatever you do, keep harassing them, but don't tell them that I'm telling you to harass them. This is happening in the good old USA. This has become what you'd call the modus operandi for the Obama White House in these situations. And it's got to come to a stop. The guy is completely out of control. Do you know what he did yesterday? He was doing a town hall meeting in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, it wasn't like they opened up a great big arena and had people come in by the tens of thousands because they can't fill those arenas anymore. The president went, what was it, last year to Ohio State University, also in Ohio, but in a place called Columbus. And he went to the big field house where OSU's basketball team plays, and hardly anybody showed up. Well, excuse me, this is not good. We've got a big empty arena and Mr. Obama here. Now, if you were CNN or MSDNC, you made sure you only showed parts of the arena where there were people sitting. But if you were Fox, you actually panned back and showed that no one wanted to hear the president speak any longer. So he had what was called a tiny, I kid you not, a small gathering at a town hall. Selected people from, the local Democrat Party machine, obviously, were told to come out. And they were given some seats in a small building, so it looked like it was packed. And they could, when they cheered, someone holds up the sign that says applause. When they cheered, that the echo off the small building's wall and roof or ceiling would make it sound as if there was this massive, rapturous crowd that was falling on every word Mr. Obama had to say. Well, what he did while he was there is he said, we need mandatory voting in the United States. What does he mean by that? What does mandatory mean? Well, Obamacare is mandatory if you don't have any other insurance. That is, if you don't buy Obamacare, you don't buy the insurance from the government exchange, you will be fined. So it's mandatory. They will punish you for not doing it. It's called coercion. And as all of you well know, when our founding fathers sat down and drew up our Declaration of Independence and then later our Constitution, they all said, you know what we need to do? We need to step on the faces of the American people until they do what we want them to do. Yeah, we need to coerce them. Oh, I see. They didn't say that. In fact, they were looking to do the exact, I got it. They wanted the opposite of that. They wanted personal liberty, that is, choice for people. So Mr. Obama went so far yesterday as to say that if you don't vote, the government should force you to vote, and if you don't, you could face a fine. Actually, in Australia, he mentioned Australia as being the model for this. In Australia, which used to be a free country, you can be fined if you don't vote, or if you don't vote on several successive elections, they'll throw you in jail. Yeah, but what if you don't want to vote for any of the candidates? What if no one appeals? Doesn't matter. They want to force you to go out and vote for the lesser of two evils. Now, you know what this is all about. In the 2014 midterm elections and going back to 2010, Mr. Obama's demographic did not come out and vote because he wasn't on the ballot. So they all stayed home. Well, they're up most of the night, I guess, with the businesses they operate out on the street corners. And so they stayed home sleeping during the day when they could have been out voting. And they didn't get out and vote in Democrat Party candidates. So what he's telling them is, look, if you want your welfare check, you got to remember that you got to dance with the one that brung you. So he's telling them, you've got to go out now and you've got to show up at the polls. And if you don't, I'll make it really miserable for you. This is the United States of America. If you don't choose to vote, it's not a crime. But he's talking about turning it into one. It is this totalitarian impulse that you find among Democrats and the American left pretty much in general, that they believe that they are going to have to force you to eat 2 servings of meat per week instead of more. That's coming from the United Nations. That was the United Nations recommendation. So they want to try and control what you eat every day. Don't eat those chips. Don't drink that beer. Drink only this juice. Eat only this broccoli. And I see you're eating meat for the 3rd time this week. We'll have to fine you. This is the direction we are going in this country. And if you don't believe, if you think that, well, he just threw out something about voting, Obamacare is a fine example of where we already are with this, with that forced, that the coercion to make people buy health insurance, whether they want to or not. And then, of course, if you can't afford it, we'll give you a subsidy. So we'll force your neighbor to buy it for you is how that really works. That's called redistribution. In some places in the world, they call that Marxist-Leninism. But it's just called redistributionism here, and it's highlighted mainly and promoted by most mainstream media in this country. What's interesting is I saw this story about the president's his overreach, his attempt to push and force people into doing what he wants them to do. And I guess the question is, are they going to be told who to vote for when they actually have to go out to vote? Because if he's going to force them to vote so they can vote for more Democrats, he wouldn't want them getting angry at being forced to vote and vote for Republicans. So therefore, you're going to have to actually go into the booth with them, right? Do you not see the direction this goes? There have been, throughout history, so many. I went to hear a speech many, many years ago by the legendary Catholic priest and historian Leonard Klein, who actually for many years was a legendary Lutheran priest, but he got fed up with the liberalism in his church, so he switched. He's one of those rare Catholic priests that actually has a wife and family. He gets a benefit of doing that because he jumped ship. But I went to hear him speak, and he said throughout history, and he was citing examples, you've got people who think they're smarter than everybody else, i.e. liberals in the United States, who think they're smarter than everybody else, and then they have to force everyone into, and when people don't react, people have free will, when they don't react the way the so-called smarter people want them to react, then what they do is they turn around and get nasty with you. French Revolution is a good example. When people didn't do exactly what the revolutionaries thought they should do, the revolutionaries started chopping off people's heads by the hundreds of thousands. And for the tiniest of crimes. In Cambodia, they marched all of the so-called intellectuals out into the countryside and killed them by the millions. Stalin starved 10 million Ukrainians. Mao killed 50 million of his own. It starts, though, with forcing people to buy health insurance, forcing people to eat what the government tells them to eat, forcing people to vote. And then it just spins out of control at some point. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, 37. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, I've got more coming up. One of the nation's oldest churches is now going to open its doors for same-sex marriage. If I could, I wanted to mention some of our fine sponsors here at News Radio 1310 KLIX who make this program possible, as well as all of the other great shows that you hear during the course of the day, 7 days a week. First of all, Western States Bus Services. Hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week. As I mentioned yesterday, they will train you. So if you do not have that commercial driver's license and you need to learn how to drive a large vehicle, they're going to train you. 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Also, coming up next Wednesday, the doctor will be in. When was the last time you asked a friend for medical advice? Well, my friends at Tripp Family Medicine are going to be live with me each Wednesday morning during Top Story between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And next week, we are going to be talking about weight loss and a healthy way to do it. And it may not be, with some of the modern science we have, it may not be as difficult as you've been led to believe. So that's coming up Wednesday mornings, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, where you can hear us anytime. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Remember, you can find them directly across from the post office on Fillmore Street. Life's too short not to feel good. So I saw something this morning as I was getting ready for work, and I thought, Well, I'd seen a story yesterday that said it might be possible, and by this morning it had become fact. U.S. Presbyterian Church has gone ahead and voted to allow same-sex marriages in its churches. Now, before you get any confusion about this, we're talking about the Presbyterian USA. Presbyterian Church USA, which the Presbyterian Church has, like many other denominations, split over the years. You have something called the PCA, which is the Presbyterian Church in America, and I have a friend of mine who's a pastor at one of those. Actually, I know two pastors in that church. They're just great, wonderful people, and I actually had to go to a funeral for a friend whose wife was attending one of those churches a couple of years ago, and lovely music, and just superb the way they look at life, and they look at your death as being that transition to something better. Well, you've got to lead a good life, of course, and in their case, they believe very much that just your faith alone is going to send you there. But they are not related to the Presbyterian USA. The PCA, in fact, if you heard Eric Erickson last week subbing for Rush Limbaugh, Eric Erickson is a member of the PCA, which is the Conservative Presbyterian Church. To give you a little bit more background, that's the type of individual who would go worship at a PCA. But at the Presbyterian Church USA, it's mainly liberals, college professors, those types of people who attend. And they broke long, long ago, about 100 years ago, at something called the Auburn Theological Seminary. And you know why I know this? Because one of my best friends did a documentary about this whole thing. They issued something called the Auburn Declaration, and they started talking about their belief in evolution and their belief in the need to redistribute wealth, and it just has been spinning out of control ever since then. This is a story from Reuters. The writer is Mary Wisniewski. The 171 regional presbyteries, or local bodies of the church, have been voting on whether to change the wording to call marriage a contract between a man and a woman to being between two people, traditionally a man and a woman. Do horses, cows, and pigs get in there at any point? The church now, this is paragraph 4, it says the church has more than 1.7 million members. And you go, wow, 1.7. Because if that's simoleons, that's a lot of money to you, right? 1.7. That's paragraph 4. Oh, gee, 1.7 million liberals. Wow, they must be right. Of course, you compare that to the fact that there are, 75 or 80 million people in this country who call themselves Roman Catholics. And you've got Southern Baptists who probably would call 40 or 50 million people members. So you look at that and you scratch your head for a minute and you've got to realize, yeah, that's really 1.7 million spread across the country, not a lot. In fact, the old Presbyterian church in my hometown, which was a beautiful old facility, closed 2 years ago. They were down to 18 members. They just couldn't keep it going any longer. And now the building is used by rock bands who play raucous concerts there on Friday nights. Yeah, well, hey, that's the direction they wanted to go, to put themselves out of business. A gathering of elders and ministers of the church voted last June to allow clergy to perform same-sex weddings. The move gave clergy the choice of whether to preside over same-sex marriages in states where they are legal. So the vote took place last night to approve all of this, but here's paragraph 7, buried way down at the bottom of the page. The church, also known as PCUSA, has lost more than 500,000 members over the past decade. Some church leaders have expressed concern that endorsement of same-sex marriage could cause an exodus of parishioners who see it as incompatible with biblical teachings. Dang that Bible thing, it keeps getting in the way. How can we be Christians with that Bible always just hovering over our shoulders? I just don't know. 8:29, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What book will they now use? That's a good question. Well, Jesus was a nice guy, and he seemed to be nice to other people. Well, you won't need much of a book for that. You'll just need sort of a half page. Maybe give someone a palm card when they come in. Remember, you want to keep that palm card. You can keep that. That's your family palm card, and you can pass that down generation to generation. It makes you wonder, do they have some sort of suicidal pact or whatever that they put together in some of these churches? We've got a check of some messages from our fine sponsors coming up just a moment. 37, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top Story with Bill Colley. Keep in mind, Governor Otter going to be joining us in about an hour right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. If I could, I wanted to mention one more time during this segment of the program, our friends at Western States Bus Services, who are currently looking to hire school bus drivers, and they'll offer you training. For a lot of people who are looking for just a little side income, this might be the ideal job. Western States Bus Services hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I should also note you can contact me every day. First of all, I'll give you an email address. Lots of people contact me throughout the day and into the evening by email, and that is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, and that last name is spelled Colley, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Also, telephone number to reach us at our studios, 736-0300. That is 736-0300. We have a caller with us right now. It's 8:34:37 at our studios. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley, and you're on the air.
Yes, Bill. I just started to reread Maritopia by Mark Levin, and I started in, I don't know if you've read it or not. But
the very first book I ever bought that he wrote, and I ordered it, got it sent to me in the mail in about 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, it just talks about how this so-called utopian controlling thing has been around forever, and it is just so amazing how they describe it, and it just fits to a T what these so-called elites think, that the only people that can make the decisions are them, and you and I have absolutely no right or the ability to decide things for us and our family and our country. If you remember in the early 1900s, this was nothing but sagebrush. So we came, they gave us 160 acres or 40 or any increment of that, up to 160 acres, and you could go out and say, okay, here you are, go out and make her happen. Well, that's exactly what the people of southern Idaho did. They started to bust it out of brush, and they realized the Snake River would irrigate this desert, and they built canals and ditches, and it was amazing. And then they show up later and says, well, we need to regulate and tax you.
Yes.
we were here. Where the hell were you when we were busting this thing out of the thing and doing the work and creating this industry that has turned into unbelievable wealth for this valley and this state? This is it's such crap, so it just goes on and on and on. And if the people don't fight back, we get what we get. Last night on Megyn Kelly talks about how I'll be done after this one more point.
Sure.
They talk about how the EPA or whoever the hell it is, you get them mixed up sometimes, I'm sure it's the EPA, wants to control how much water you use at the hotel when you shower. And then as I was watching TV the other day, they were talking about a new thermostat that was going to be really great for your home. And I says, yes, so they could hack and control and monitor what the heat in your home is.
Yeah, smart metering.
Yes, and I said to myself, when you don't know nothing, we text and we're on these devices. We know everything about everything but what matters. And so it's enough to drive you nuts.
I would say that a lot of us are pretty much right on the edge, but I thank you much for the call. It's nice to know that there are a few other people out there who maintain their sanity and perhaps keep us from leaping into the canyon, wherever we might be. A canyon is the closest place I could think of, at least while we're talking here. We don't really have a lot of high buildings, so it would have to be the canyon. Yeah, you see it left and right going on. There's a piece that I wrote for my LinkedIn account, and I ended up writing it yesterday afternoon after reading about the president's call for mandatory voting. And I decided to explain how all of these other things have happened. And we can't just say this is an isolated event. And I cite several other instances, several other cases, and then I posted a link to that at the KLIX Facebook page. So if you go to our KLIX Facebook page and you see a post that I've made, it says Barack Obama stamping on a human face forever. That's a play on words from a great novel called 1984, written by George Orwell. And you can read that, but it tells you how just that one suggestion, and I make a comparison to what happened in revolutionary France, that one suggestion dovetails so much into everything else the man is doing. Today, speaking of ruling by fiat, he has issued an executive order. This news is breaking as we're speaking, to control emissions from federal agencies, it says. So in other words, I guess people who are actually driving government vehicles. I saw someone in a pickup truck the other day with government plates. They may have to be switching over to some sort of electric power. But here you go again. The mind-numbing stupidity of all of this. If you're going to be driving around in electric automobiles, how do you generate the electricity? Well, you burn oil and coal. Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. Unless you're going to run it on liberals' flatulence, and then, of course, we could power the fleet for 500 years. Hey, I've got more coming up. Speaking of liberals, there's an attempt to, once again, at least legalize medical uses for marijuana in Idaho. Those things always end up being just the slippery slope to full legalization. Details on that ahead. Also, coming up in the next half hour, we're going to be talking to the CEO of the John Birch Society about a Pacific Free Trade Agreement, and he's not in favor. That's on the way. Got to mention this one. I'm checking out Fox News at the moment, and according to Fox News, the White House and President Obama are trying to get Bo Bergdahl to cop to some sort of a plea agreement. Now, wait a second. This is a military court. This is not a civilian court. So what sort of plea would he cop to? And why would you even have to? It's not like he's going to walk away on this one. Well, he's walked away before, hasn't he? Oh, okay. So I'm just looking at this and wondering what sort of a cop a deal do they mean? What would he do at this point? Say, well, I was derelict in my duties and get a slap on the wrist? Folks, he decided to walk away and join the enemy. And he may have also caused, because we had people who went out looking for him, he may have also caused the deaths of 5 of his fellow soldiers. Now, why would he have to cop some sort of plea? In order to save face with the Obama White House? Because it gave up 5 cutthroats in exchange for him? I'm so sick and tired of the political correctness and the dodginess of this White House. Remember, just the other day, there was a great piece in the Washington Post by one of its editors, a guy by the name of Jonathan Capehart, who said that whole hands up, don't shoot thing, or don't shoot hands up, whatever it was called, was a lie. It never happened. And yet, you had people in the Obama White House, the Attorney General, who were whipping up the flames on all of this, resulting in a couple of police officers in New York City being shot and killed. Also, you had 2 police officers in Missouri shot last week. Why? Because they lied. And you remember that old line? Bush lied, people died. Bush lied, people died. It was like pulling a string on the back of a liberal and all you'd hear was, Bush lied, people died. Bush lied, people died. Bush lied, people died. That's about all they could do, is repeat what they were programmed to say. And yet, you've got dead police officers because of the Obama administration's interference. And now you look at this situation, you have people who died searching for this treacherous man who deserted, and they're going to whitewash the thing. Oh, and after the whole Benghazi situation erupted, remember the lie? Well, it was because people saw this film making fun of the Prophet Muhammad, so they were rioting. They'd never seen the film before. They'd never heard of the film before. Although some of them decided to watch it afterwards, and then guess what? They went out and started rioting following that for 2 more weeks. And people died all over the world. So I guess you could say Obama lied, people died. Isn't that more to the point? Obama lied, people died. And lefty out there, you better get your facts straight. You can reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 38 right now, 847 at our studios. And, of course, you can reach us by email, too, at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And you're on the air. Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Bill, what you just said was exactly right. The people will sit here and they'll complain and not know what the hell they're complaining about. But people need to remember in this country, we have got the biggest embarrassment for the President of the United States that we've ever had. Dick Cheney said the other day that he's the worst one in his lifetime. And there's no doubt about that. And these buffoons we have running this, they're getting their butts kicked like with Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a man. There's a leader. There is a person that will stand up for what he believes in. And now we've got Obama. Apparently, he was even trying to help Netanyahu be beat. Can't do it. For the first time in many, many, many generations, Bill, we do not have a president that is the most powerful man in the world. He's not. This man is a buffoon, and it has nothing to do with race, has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with nothing, except he's an inept piece of crap when it comes to being the president of the United States.
How do you really feel?
Well, that's how I really feel. Okay, we'll just carry on. But no, the man, he cannot make a decision. He does not have the ability. A leader, you look at, let's say General Patton, for instance. General Patton would get in the mud and the blood with everybody and do it. Obama, oh, no. He'll pass down these stupid little rules that we're going to start using electric cars for the federal government, yet his wife flies to L.A. the same day that bastard does on a separate airplane.
Well, and I thank you much for the call. I think what we're dealing with, and to say that he can't make a decision, he can make a decision. The problem is he makes the wrong decisions. How do you go tell the parents of those troops who died searching for Bergdahl that you're going to let him skate on this one? Because the reason you're doing it is you don't want to have to come back and say, well, I made a mistake in releasing 5 cutthroats who will come back to kill more Americans in order to release Bergdahl because I thought it would look good for me at the time. And all of you people who lost your children out there on the battlefield because of Bergdahl, well, I'm sorry, but it's all about making me look good. And I am the supreme leader, and you should be following me. You can reach our program today at 736-0300. 736-0300. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. 38 right now at our studios. Coming up on 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock this morning. And you're on the air. You're up next.
Hey, how come you're not talking about that representative that got kicked out for corruption? Oh, that's right. That doesn't include in your passages. It's always attack the black guy, attack the minorities.
Well, I understand that this guy who's resigning from office because of his stupidity, but usually this works on both parties. You see both Democrats and Republicans dropping out because of stupid things they did while campaigning. But thank you much for the call, sir. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Bill, I think you guys have all got this wrong, or maybe you don't have it wrong. I think you really understand, but you can't really say it. Our president's not a buffoon. He's doing exactly what he wants done. We're the buffoons because we put him back in there. I guess we didn't. Somebody else did. But we're not impeaching him for all of his lies and his deceits and everything else in the Constitution. I personally feel that anyone that pledges to defend the Constitution and doesn't do it needs to be removed. I don't care if he's a judge. I don't care if he's a Republican. I don't care what he's doing. If he's done it and said that he's going to defend the Constitution and doesn't, he should be out.
No one has the stones, and I thank you for the call, no one has the stones to remove the man. Our previous caller who mentioned, is it Aaron Schock? Is that the clown that's being, he's resigning from, he'll end up, by the way, also being facing some criminal charges because of some of the ineptitude in his efforts to raise money to campaign on. But when you see some dingling like that, and they do come up in both political parties, but here's the thing. Nobody died. 5 people died looking for Bo Bergdahl, and now President Obama is apparently going to give him a seat in the cabinet somewhere. That's a little hyperbolic. I understand that. 5 people died. And to try to paint a moral equivalency between some stupid freshman congressman who didn't know right from wrong when it came to fundraising, and to Bo Bergdahl joining the enemy and then more of his fellow soldiers getting killed because of it, there is absolutely no equality when it comes to the morals of those two situations or the immorality of those two situations. You're on the air with Bill Colley. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hello. I have one statement. I think Obama is taking a page out of Adolf Hitler's book. Thank you.
I thank you much for the call. David Axelrod, before he shaved his mustache, was almost a dead ringer. I believe he was also involved in trying to unseat Mr. Netanyahu. You know, if you criticize Barack Obama, as our flaming lefty caller there was saying that we just beat up on minorities, if you criticize Barack Obama's policies, you're called a racist. All right, if the liberals criticize Mr. Netanyahu, then you're an anti-Semite. If you're going to play by that logic, fair is fair. That caller who calls up screaming that he is an American citizen, although he might be naturalized or however he came about it, and that he's got a right to shoot off his mouth and kiss up to every liberal he likes out there. What he doesn't seem to understand, or he doesn't seem to quite grasp, is that these people are Jew bashing. And if he's supporting them, then he must be one too. 8:54. Bill Colley with you this morning, 39 at our studios. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Before we got off on the Bo Bergdahl tangent, I was going to quickly mention an Idaho Senate leader is the latest legislator to offer a proposal on allowing parents to use oil extracted from cannabis thought to alleviate seizures in children with severe forms of epilepsy. So this has come up a couple of times already in Boise, this legislative session. Well, it's back. As I'm reading this story, though, it struck me, it's from Associated Press, it struck me rather quickly that it says that this cannabis oil is thought to alleviate seizures. We don't know that it does. It's thought to alleviate seizures. Every place you've ever seen all of these moves made, it always comes down to this. If we deny people their medical marijuana, we are being mean to children or to cancer victims or to old people or to people with arthritis or to people with epilepsy. You pick your cause, right? We're always being mean to them. But the whole notion is every time these states have passed these laws, they've ended up within a couple of years getting full-fledged legalized marijuana. That's what this really is all about. Because as the story says, it is thought to alleviate seizures. It doesn't say it happens. If you go to Colorado and various places now and you see all of the toking going on, and by the way, media has been rather remiss reporting about all of the problems that has led to. It's funny how that works. They wanted it. They cheerleaded for it. Remember, tobacco's bad and wrong, and we need to eliminate it and stamp it out. But when it comes to the liberal sacrament, that is, i.e. marijuana, then they're all for it. And we've got to go ahead with it no matter what the social costs. But in some of these states where they have gone ahead with the medical marijuana, the cannabinoid oil or the marinol or whatever they call it, I guess the marinol is the extract that's actually legal, but to them they don't want that. They want this other stuff, I guess the hash oil or whatever else they need. There is always a black market that develops around it, and it starts getting sold on street corners and often near schools. Funny how that ends up turning out. But I wanted to mention that because I don't think it will fly. This is another attempt, though, for someone to come out and say, well, I'm for the young children who are suffering. And if you vote against me, you are against the young children who are suffering. Yeah, that ploy is beginning to lose a little bit of steam, isn't it? It's 8:57. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 39 at our studios. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Arthur Thompson. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the John Birch Society. He is in Idaho. He's got a couple of presentations this week. I think he did the one last night. He's got another one coming up tonight. He's going to talk to us about that. He's going to talk about, in fact, a Pacific Free Trade Agreement and what it could or will mean for you. Pretty serious stuff that we're talking about here. He's on the way in just a few minutes. And also coming up after his visit with us we'll be joined by Governor Butch Otter. There is some talk going on right now that says that we may be close to coming to an agreement on a bill to raise teachers' salaries in Idaho. So we'll spend some time talking with him about that. Something could break as early as today in the legislature. And so we hope that we can get some comments from him and maybe see which direction it's going to go, because I am sure he is talking a bit more to the legislature than we are. At least he's got a better channel going back and forth. Also, we may not get to it today, but I do have to mention it looks like there may be a deal finally for transportation funding as well. This coming out of the Associated Press. The plan would draw roughly $13 million in general funds. Remember, we were talking to Steve Millington the other day, and he said if they start raiding the general fund, we're in serious trouble. Well, yes, that looks like it's going to happen, in conjunction with a 5-cent increase in your gasoline tax. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Fox News is straight ahead. Bill Colley with you this morning. And again, Arthur Thompson scheduled to join us in just a few minutes. And you may want to hear him in person, because I'm sure that his presentation on this free trade matter is going to be fascinating. He'll have all the details on how you can do that. That's coming up in just a few minutes following Fox News at 9 o'clock. Long before there was a Tea Party movement, and long before we had people described as the silent majority, there was a patriot organization in this country. It's been with us, oh golly, going on neighborhood of 60 years or somewhere in that time length. And I was telling a story in the last hour that I used to play an old video clip on the radio so people could hear the audio from the founder of the organization, Robert Welch, or at least he was there at the beginning of the organization, helped founding it. And it was a speech he made all the way back in 1957. And we used to play that and then discuss with our listening audience how everything he predicted had come to pass in the United States over the 50-some years that happened to follow his remarks. It's 9:07. Bill Colley with you. It's 40 degrees. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us anywhere around the world. The organization is the John Birch Society. It's named after an American missionary who was working amongst a communist-controlled area in Asia when he was killed. We're joined today by the current Chief Executive Officer of the JBS, and that is Arthur Thompson. And first of all, sir, welcome to our program.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
You've got an event coming up somewhat locally tonight in Burley, Idaho. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I'm going to be talking about free trade, and isn't that interesting? Actually, it is very interesting when you get into it. The package is different than the contents. I mean, we've all had the experience of buying something based on the packaging or the marketing. We get it home, open it up, try to use it. It doesn't quite do what it was advertised to do. It's the same with politicians. So, we vote for the rhetoric, but that's not what we get in the action after the election. Free trade's the same thing. It's not free, and it's not trade. It's a packaging deal to sell us on internationalism, international merger. That's what it's all about. And there's some trade in there, yes. About 80% of it is more regulations on American businesses and American society and American government. And that's the dangerous part of it. And what there is of trade, it doesn't take into account other things. One example. For instance, they say, well, we're going to make the tariffs all level, so we can compete so that we don't have high tariffs or they don't have high tariffs and that sort of thing. But there's something we leave out of it, and that is, what if you have trade between two countries where one country has a high tax on business and the other country has a low tax? Obviously, the lower taxed country can ship a widget into the United States much cheaper than we can manufacture it here because of the tax. Now, if you go to the internet, you can find a table which will list all the corporate tax levels of every country in the world. And guess what? The United States has the highest corporate tax of any country in the world.
When you talk about this agreement, and I can recall being in a newsroom working in the early 1990s when NAFTA was being kicked about, and I think that the one lasting impression of that was Ross Perot's giant sucking sound comment, and I think he was somewhat prophetic in the sense that a lot of businesses just simply moved across the border to places like Juarez The executives live on the American side of the border and travel back and forth to work. They were the only Americans who retained jobs in that case. But there's something else that goes on here, and I think it's a loss of a U.S. sovereignty, because we end up being subject to all sorts of trade organizations that are well beyond the scope of our own government.
Well, that's one of the things I talk about tonight, because I point out that in order to actually enforce these trade partnerships, a new international policing body has to be created. In other words, nobody will have the ability to make a unilateral decision. And another aspect of it is that these agreements are always subordinating some aspect of the American government to the United Nations. And it's in those treaties all the time. Now, that means a loss of sovereignty, the loss of independence, the ability of the American people to make our own decisions for ourselves. We like trade. We like free trade. But these partnerships, as they call them, are not trade. They are, what the title says, partnerships. All the communications out of the White House and the think tanks that are putting these things together refer to it as economic integration. Well, economic integration is a long way away from free trade. It is not just implying, but stating out front that this is merger. It's a merger of our economy with other countries. And they even put it in the title, partnership. What does partnership mean? If you are in a partnership legally with another individual in business, that means you merge. If two companies decide to merge into a partnership, that's what they're doing. They're merging. And so that is what is going on. They're blatant about it in the thinks that partnership is benign when they read it, and it's not.
Our guest on the air right now is the CEO of the John Birch Society, Mr. Arthur Thompson, spending some time with us this morning. 40 at our studios, coming up on 9:13. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Your remarks tonight will be at 7 o'clock in Burley. Where are you actually going to be appearing?
At the King's Little Theater on Park Avenue, 2100 Park Avenue, King's Little Theater.
You drew a big crowd in Boise last night, so I guess this is a message that's, as you pointed out, it may not sound, when you talk free trade, it may not sound the sexiest topic, but it's drawing a lot of interest.
No, it doesn't. But it really is, once you realize it. I've never had anybody, well, let me back up. At the conclusion of my talks, I have a lot of people that come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't understand. I didn't know. I didn't realize how serious this really is. And in my book, International Merger by Foreign Entanglements, I get into a lot of this. I also point out all the various treaties that we've had with the United Nations that affect everything in the United States. Now, I don't go into them in detail. I just point them out. The one, however, that one thing that is really a big danger are the human rights agreements that we've had with the United Nations, which are destroying our Bill of Rights. A lot of people don't know that. We are now because of our membership and everything else in the United Nations, we are subject to control. And through these agreements, they have literally said that people really don't have any rights that come from God, the way our Declaration of Independence said. You know, we are endowed with our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And now they're saying, no, your rights come from government, and we can take them away. And literally, that's what the language says when you read it. And we've agreed to that. We've ratified that. And it's very dangerous.
For people, by the way, when you mentioned some of, I've watched some of your videos on the website, but if people wanted to get more details, what's the address, the web address you would send them to?
Well, JBS, John Birch Society, jbs.org. And from there, you can go and surf into a number of all of our affiliates. You can go to the issues page and find about 25 different issues with quite a large amount of information on them, so on and so forth.
We have a few minutes left with the CEO of the John Birch Society, Arthur Thompson, with us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 9:15. You were also speaking yesterday in Boise about this constitutional convention. which has been floated by a handful of Republicans. I think a lot of people are getting a little bit nervous, though, about the whole thought of it.
Well, they should be. The thing that bothers us the most is that while the front groups are conservative, behind the front, they're all liberals and leftists. They've poured tens of millions of dollars into this campaign, and they're trying to convince people that there's nothing wrong, don't look behind the curtain, that all we're trying to do is get a balanced budget amendment. Well, that's all well and good, but why go to all the trouble to hold a convention where we don't know what the language will be, because they will not put the language together until the convention convenes? Whereas if it's done the traditional way, they can write the convention, put it out to the states, and they can vote it up or down if it's good. But frankly, I've never seen a balanced budget amendment proposal that actually will balance the budget if you're talking about money in and money out.
I was watching one of your videos where you were talking about politicians who call themselves conservatives, but if they only vote conservative 60 or 80% of the time, the 20 to 40% of the time, they're obviously something else. And I think your point was they just need to adhere to the Constitution as it was written. And if they do that on all issues, then they'll get it right.
That's right. And they'll balance the budget as well. But that's not what's going on. They say, you John Birchers, you don't have a plan. Well, we do have a plan. We have a plan of trying to get them to adhere to the Constitution. And we ask the question, if the politicians do not adhere to the Constitution now, what makes anyone believe that they will adhere to something new?
I would imagine that you find some welcoming people when you're talking in front of political people, but a lot of times I'm sure that they are a little bit antsy and probably looking for the door.
Well, that doesn't happen as much as it used to. Most people, when they come, they really want to know what we have to say, and they're polite enough to stick it out. But that's a small minority of any crowd, and we welcome anyone who disagrees with us as long as they, are polite.
Well, and you have a rating service too as well. So if people want to find out who's actually adhering to the Constitution, they can take a look at that.
That's correct. It's our Freedom Index, and they can go to jbs.org and access that. We evaluate all senators and members of the House of Representatives based on the Constitution and 10 votes that they've had over the last 6 months. We do that twice a year.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you're enjoying the visit to Idaho. I think this is very fertile ground, at least in this part of the country. You're going to find a lot more people perhaps in tune with what you're talking about.
Well, it's a great state. I've always liked it, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, super, and I thank you for taking some time with us, and hopefully we can chat again.
Okay, look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Arthur Thompson joining us this morning. He is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the John Birch Society, taking a few minutes to talk with us because he's making an appearance tonight in Burley. As he pointed out, he's going to be speaking at the, King's Theater at 7 o'clock tonight, and he's inviting you to come by and hear his presentation. He did the presentation last night while he was in Boise, and he talked a bit about this free trade agreement, this Pacific Free Trade Agreement, and his criticisms of it. But he also took some time yesterday while in Boise to speak to various groups about this proposed constitutional convention and the dangers of getting back into something like that. You're opening up a can of worms. A lot of people feel we got it right the first time. It doesn't mean you have to go back and start rewriting it. So you have an opportunity tonight, if you're in the Burley area, to drop by and actually see his presentation. And I would highly recommend it. If, even as he pointed out, if you disagree, there's an opportunity to have a discussion about it. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, in about 10 minutes, we're going to be joined by the governor of Idaho, CL Butch Otter, and he's talking with us about a couple of issues that are certainly on the hot burner right now. One is pay raises for teachers across the state, the career ladder proposal. And number two, the opening of a new business, groundbreaking just the other day here in Twin Falls. Details on that coming up. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 41 right now, the temperature at our studio. Story at the Daily Caller today says that there have been so far, here we are into the latter half of March, there have been no tornadoes reported in the United States. All right, you shrug your shoulders and you say, why is that such a big deal? Well, first of all, we've had all of the screaming memes on the global warming side telling us that because the fact that we actually belch, have flatulence, drive automobiles, live in big homes, that we are causing the end of the planet by frying it with all of our human activity. Well, that would mean, they say, more serious storms. You've heard they were calling about, what was it? They were saying that we would see all these great Category 5 hurricanes. We haven't seen one in 10 years. In fact, hurricanes have been kind of hard to find up and down the East Coast over the last few years. Having survived a couple of them, let me just tell you, they were not everything that I expected, but in some cases, I was sitting in an RV during the height of Hurricane Sandy, and I was sitting in the RV rocking back and forth, wondering if the thing would stay on four wheels. It did. I should point that out. That's why I'm here today. The tornado count for March 2015 is 0, according to the Daily Caller. This is only the second time this has happened since 1950. March is usually a pretty big month for severe weather, but this year has been eerily quiet, the writer says, with no tornadoes or severe thunderstorm watches issued by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. On top of that, the National Weather Service has seen no sign of any dramatic changes for the next week or so. Since the beginning of this year, NOAA has only issued 4 tornado watches and no severe storm watches. In comparison, NOAA usually issues 52 tornado watches by mid-March. Since January 1st, only 20 tornadoes have been reported, compared to the 130 tornado average for that time period. So, where are all the big storms? All of the leftist scientists were claiming we were going to see. There'd be more tornadoes and more hurricanes, and they'd be more severe, and they'd just be happening every other hour all across the country. And yet, this is all we've got going on? Hello? Do they perhaps have any ability to say that they overreacted? No, they will not admit that they made a mistake. They'll try, well, as my data was just slightly off, it's going to happen next week. Now, if we have a massive tornado that goes through the Midwest next week and just devastates a couple of communities, I know we're going to get that one caller back here saying, yeah, you don't talk about that man who in Congress who's a Republican who took money illegally, and now you don't talk about these tornadoes hitting Lawrence, Kansas. Well, they do happen from time to time now, don't they? But if we're not seeing them anywhere near in the numbers that we used to see them, then I think we might be able to start having some serious questions about all of the fanatics out there who claim that the Earth is coming to an end. Gosh, they're a difficult crowd, aren't they? I mean, I don't know why we have to get into this with them. It really frosts my Cheerios. And hey, another quick note on environment. Because if the left had their choice, we would not be using gasoline any longer to fuel our automobiles. But we have a great industry in this country called fracking that has been pulling all sorts of oil out of deposits in places like Texas and North Dakota. And I want you to hear this. If you did not know this, Texas and North Dakota, even as that industry has slowed somewhat because of the drop in oil prices, it won't go away. We've got the technology now in place. We can always pull it out of there if we want to. But they have been creating, those 2 states, 6 jobs for every other job created in the rest of the country during this time period. Hello? Why don't we tell Mr. Obama Keystone XL pipeline might alleviate unemployment altogether? Oh, we told him that, haven't we? Governor Butch Otter coming up in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you. 41 right now at our studios. It's 9:28 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Having a brief conversation on off-air on the telephone with our next guest about weather issues. Although, look, you get a long stretch of sunshine, it's not too terribly difficult to take it. You just got to realize it will rain at some point. We're all aware of that. 9:32, 42. Of course, he knows more of the experts on these things than I do because of his role. 9:42 or 9:32, 42 at our studios at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley, and I thank you for joining us. And our guest during this segment of the program is Governor of Idaho, Governor C.L. Butch Otter, and he's joining us again on air. And welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me.
One of the topics I know we were going to talk about today, for a couple of years now, you've had a panel that has been working on this topic called Career Ladder, which would help with teacher retention in the state of Idaho. And there's been a great deal of concern going on about that. It looked like yesterday there may have been a deal ready. And of course, we're getting toward crunch time with the state legislature. Are they just going back to the drawing table? Is something, to your knowledge, close at this point?
Well, there's in the process, Bill. The career ladder also has the career ladder is sort of the money. This is what we're going to pay, but there's also a policy bill that I would like to see in advance of the pay bill, and that policy bill says this is the accountability part. So we're willing to pay more, but we want accountability for it. And that usually, once we arrive at the money, usually it's the accountability where we've had the pushback from some folks. But listen, I'm willing to pay more. I just want to make sure that what we're paying for, we're getting. Do
you have a feeling then that it is close, that there will be something on your desk?
The policy bill is moving, Bill. And as soon as that policy bill, I suspect that as soon as the policy bill passes either the House or the Senate, then they will start processing the pay bill, the career ladder bill, the money bill. And they like to do that because I want the accountability piece before I get the money piece.
I think that a lot of people look at the legislature when they're what's the old joke? It's like watching people make sausage. But my experience has been there are these highs and lows where you look like you have something and then it goes away. Then it comes back and then it goes away. And that give and take does continue for a couple of months. I guess it shouldn't make anybody overly nervous when something doesn't happen as soon as we expect it would happen.
Right. Well, Bill, you have to remember that you got 105, you got 35 senators and 70 members of the House, and every senator represents 42,000 people, and every member of the House represents 42,000 people, and so because of their legislative districts. And so they'll get requests from their constituencies. They'll get requests from their cities or within their county or, some other governmental jurisdiction of a bill that they want. So there's a lot of other things that are going on. In fact, I looked at the bill numbers today. I think we're at around 480 bills that have actually one house or the other has actually taken action on. How many bills have been printed? About 1,000. So there's a lot of bills that get printed, but they really there's no further action, and so it is a moving target all the time. But generally, when you see the money bills starting to move, and the big ones are going to be education, corrections, and health and welfare, because those three agencies, those three departments of state, take up 94% of the budget, and so you can expect to see the end of the session when you start moving education, corrections, and health and welfare.
You bring up a point here about the fact that you're working with 135 people. If we look at it, I guess you'd be the quarterback if we're making an analogy, but you also have to have other people out there blocking and running and catching passes and the like. The public often only sees, though, you because you're the most familiar name. They don't necessarily know all of those other people. So when there's blowback, it usually ends up coming to you first.
Well, that's right. And remember, in the Senate, you got to have at least 18 people that agree with you out of the 35. And in the House, you got to have 36 people that agree with you out of the 70. And so if you don't have those 54 people and divided up in the two houses, if you don't have those 54 people out of the 105, you're probably not going to get much done.
Anything? We've got a break coming up in a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some business expansion on the other side of that. But any take on the transportation funding? Is that close as well, or are we looking perhaps at some more discussion?
Well, I think there's going to be some more discussion. There was a bill introduced yesterday, a couple of bills that have started through the legislative process. One, I'm told, is going nowhere. The other one probably has some support, but how far it's going to go, they're not sure. But I'm also told that there's a bill that I think is probably more reflective of what we need and where we need to get the money, that's yet to be introduced, but it will be introduced today.
Will these people be working some long days, I guess, in the next week?
Well, they are. If you watch them on public television, on the channels on TV, they go in at 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and then some of them at noon they're gone. Or they're not on TV anymore. But where they are is in committees. Where they are is having hearings. Where they are is they're actually working pretty long hours, much more than what you would see on TV would suggest.
Coming up in the next segment, we'll have a short break with some of our fine sponsors here. But coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about a groundbreaking that took place in the Twin Falls area just a few days ago. I did get a chance to ask one of the Twin Falls counselors if she got to keep the shovel, but that did not happen, apparently. All of those pretty gold shovels have to go back on the shelf, I guess. But as I recall, we are in the top 10 when it comes to our tax structure in the country, and that may be one of the signs we're seeing so much expansion. And if we could, after this break, maybe chat a little bit about that and
love to
what that means coming up for people in the state, because a lot of places in the country would likely be envious, especially if they saw the growth around a small city like Twin Falls over the last decade or so. Governor, if you can hold on for a few minutes, pour yourself a cup of coffee if you need to. And,
I'll get it. How much time do I have?
You got about 3 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
All right, thank you. Governor C.L. Butch Otter joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And he's going to chat with us in a few minutes about a new business that is going to be opening its doors in Twin Falls, one of many that have happened here in the last 10 years or so. That's on the way. 42 at our studios. It's 9:40. Thank you for joining us this morning on Top Story. Now, see that tune you're hearing? That reminds me of living back east, and I lived in a lot of high-tax states. And because of that, we saw very little business growth. And when people wondered why all of the local plants and factories were packing up and moving west and south, fairly simple reason, and that is because we had high utility prices and we had some of the highest taxes in all of the country. On the other hand, in Idaho, you have among the top 10, I think the rank is number 9, best tax structures in the country when it comes to doing business, as well as low-cost utilities. And that means you're going to see some business expansion. 9:44, 43 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, we're welcoming the governor of the great state of Idaho to the program today, Governor C.L. Butch Otter, and spending a few minutes with us. And Governor, as I understand it, you were involved in a groundbreaking just last week with a company called Cliff Bar.
I was, Bill, and it was it was a deal that we actually had gotten put together quite a while back, and bless those folks. They really did us proud. Number one, a lot of people may not realize this, even in your listening area, Bill, but this is their first plant. This is their first plant. They've usually gone to another bakery, an industrial bakery, or another candy bar maker or energy bar maker or something like that, and said, "Make this bar for us. This is what we want it to look like. This is the wrapper that we want around it, and these are the different kind of bars that we want." So this is their first capital expansion. And it's right here in Idaho, and it's about $92 million.
When we coming to Twin Falls, and I can look at there's just this almost like dividing line between where you have the old city and then a new city that has sprung up in a matter of a decade that is as large or larger. The growth here has just been phenomenal, and I think that a lot of people out there who realize they wonder why we don't have a quicker consensus on some of these tax bills and some of these other programs at the state capitol or at the state house as well. But it's because we have managed to keep that tax rate low, and a lot of people are just concerned about messing with that because we would lose potentially some of that great growth.
That's right. Bill, with the Idaho is the fifth fastest growing. Last year was the fifth fastest growing state economically. We had the fifth fastest growing economy in the United States. Let me give you the four states that are ahead of us: Wyoming, gas, oil, and coal; North Dakota, gas and oil; West Virginia, gas, oil, and coal; and Oklahoma. So here we are without all of those kind of natural subsurface wealth resources that, but what we do have is we got a population that represents a motivated workforce. They show up on time. You can count on them. We've got, as you already mentioned, a low-cost energy relative to the rest of the other states, and we got a tax structure that's very favorable. But when Cliff Bar comes in, when Chobani comes in, when Frulac comes in, when those companies step up to the plate, Glanbia, and say this is going to be our world headquarters, you need to know that other companies that compete with them or supply them take a look at Idaho and say, well, gosh, if that responsible and successful a company is going to Twin Falls, Idaho, why wouldn't we at least go look? And so that's how we get an awful lot of our introductions, Bill, is because of the quality of companies and people that we have attracted. And we've attracted those people because we got the College of Southern Idaho sitting there waiting to build a workforce for them. We've got the city management. We've got the county management that says, what do we need to do to make this happen? And then we got a cheerleader like Jan Rogers that says, listen, I'll make the contacts with the state government. You guys here on the local level, we'll work with you. We'll make things happen. And that's how it's happened.
I want to thank you for taking some time with us today. And I did not know that about the fifth fastest growing economy in the country, so you educated me today, which is a good thing. They always told us when I was a young guy in radio that you got to leave people with something that they've learned during the course of the day.
Good.
I thank you again and wish you well, and perhaps we can talk again once session wraps and things start to quiet down a little bit in Boise.
Anytime, Bill, and I'll tell Hanyon to let you know when I'm going to be down in the area, and maybe we can sit and have a cup of coffee and look across the microphone at each other.
Oh, that'd be great. I'm sure the folks here would love to hear you again.
I'd love to be there. Thanks.
Well, take care, Governor, and thank you again.
All right.
Bye-bye now. 9:49, coming up on 9:50 in Mike Huckabee. The Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. 736-6563. That is 736-6563. And we do want to thank the governor for joining us as well today. Governor C.L. Butch Otter of Idaho spending a few minutes with us as they're down to just a week trying to wrap up that legislative session and, 8 days. And it looks as if he's confident they're going to be getting there. And as he points out, a lot of this is fairly common year to year where you've got a lot of serious debate. But that one point being made, that debate is there because the state is a low-tax state and there's always concern about overdoing it, might be probably the best explanation for why we have all of these long nights taking place among legislators. Mike Huckabee up next. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. 9:54, 43 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've got a quick message from our friend Kyle, and he says if you're planning on attending that speech tonight, that presentation, more of a presentation, with Arthur Thompson from the John Birch Society, he said if you're looking to get to the King's Little Theater, it is actually in Burley High School. So that's 7 o'clock tonight. And he's going to be talking about his organization's opposition to a constitutional convention, as well as his organization's opposition to a free trade agreement with the Pacific Rim, which he says will, in the long run, only remove more of U.S. sovereignty and turn more of it over to international organizations. So he's appearing tonight, 7 o'clock, at the King's Little Theater at Burley High School if you plan to attend. Just wanted to pass that along. 9:55 now, and also a couple other notes. I was listening to Governor Huckabee talking about speed cameras. I've got them. There are some, they not only run them, in some cities, of course, they just sit atop the lights, but in some places, they actually have these little booths that sit alongside the road, and they actually clock you. How accurate are they? In Baltimore, Maryland, they once gave a guy a speeding ticket when he had his car parked on the street. That might hint at a problem. Now, I'm a little concerned about this because I'm not what you'd call, I don't think I'm a bad driver. I do have those brain freezes every once in a while that everyone has that annoys some other driver on the road. That's why I usually don't curse out other drivers, is because I know in 2 weeks I'll be doing the same stupid thing. But I've never been involved in a terribly serious accident. 2, I've never had a speeding ticket. I have a couple of times been ticketed for overtime parking. But this past couple of weeks, and I was just driving down the street, coming home from Walmart one day, and I just noticed the lights suddenly changing, and I did not have time to hit the brakes because I would have had to hit them and really hit them hard, and there were people behind me, and I saw the light turn red as I rolled under it. Now, I can normally argue I did not see the light turn red, but if there was a camera there, they took my picture. And also, I had another moment where I managed a similar situation, same street, to get underneath the light. I saw it turning yellow, but again, you always worry about that. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think I'm not going to say we don't have enough time on yellow to do what we need to appropriately do, but I don't know that there's a lot of leeway in there when the camera takes your picture to go in and argue that, there's a split second one way or the other. I don't think that they buy that sort of defense. Years ago, I was driving on a highway, and I got off the highway back east where they're heavily regulated, and I'd already paid my toll, but I got off the highway because a young lady of my acquaintance was with me traveling, and she said, "I need to go to the bathroom." And with that, of course, I said, "Yes, anything you need." I got off the highway. Well, we got back on the on-ramp after leaving the gas station, and I started flooring it, well, not going really fast, but picking up speed, and realized I passed a little basket. In other words, because I got off the exit and I got back on, I needed to pay them 50 cents, which I would not have had to do if I hadn't gotten off the exit in the first place. I could have just pulled over and told her, "Walk up there in the woods." Well, that would not have worked. That might have been the end of the relationship right there. So I blew by this thing, but then I realized what I'd done, so I pulled over because there was a car behind me. I let the car behind me pass me. I backed up, threw my 50 cents in, and then I drove on. A couple of weeks later, I got this beautiful picture of the back of my car in the mail with a $25 fine, plus they wanted me to pay the 50 cents. And so I wrote them back, and to this day, I don't know if it ever got accepted. No one ever came and arrested me. But I wrote back and I said, if you check your camera, you'll notice I backed up and dropped my money in there. So I hope that was the end of it. You just never know. You could be driving somewhere, you could get pulled over, and they could suddenly say, "There's been a warrant out for you since 2005. Not that that happens to people. No, never. 9:58. Tomorrow, Friday, hey, the College of Southern Idaho will drop by with some details about what's going on over the weekend there. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'm back in this chair tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.